Okay, welcome to today's SDEC session. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Adam Greco and I'm with Search Discovery, and I'll be moderating our session behind the scenes. For those of you who are new to the SDEC, we are a free analytics education community that does weekly webinars related to things like digital analytics, digital marketing, and so on. We have about 12 topic areas that you can join, and I'll be putting information in the chat if you want to formally join and get proactive invites to our webinars and also access to our SDEC Slack group, in which we have over 50 past recorded webinars. During the session today, if you have questions for our presenter, Lucas, please use the Zoom Q&A area, and I will moderate those and we'll cover those questions at the end. If you have a technical question, either about the session or Zoom or something related to the SDEC, you can go ahead and use the chat. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the SDEC Slack group by the end of the day. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lucas. Lucas, thanks so much for joining us and presenting today.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Adam. Great teacher, for allowing me to share some thoughts here today. Thanks everybody for joining this webinar. Yeah, and I'm going to talk about the so-called blind spot of marketing measurement. The screen sharing is not active, I guess, right?
You may just have to click into your slides to just make sure that they move forward.
Do you see them?
I see your starting slide, but not
now
the second slide.
Second slide, wonderful. Okay, then we're ready to go. So again, I'm going to talk about the so-called blind spot of marketing measurement. That is the assumption that a conversion is good for your business. And this assumption is underlying all of marketing measurement, and there's a whole industry called conversion optimization. And I'm not saying that conversions are always bad for you, but nobody's questioning this assumption that conversions are always good for you. And as I've seen with a couple of clients now, there's a huge lever for optimization of budgets, of on-site features, etc. And I want to share with you one example of a client, a large Swiss e-commerce shop with hundreds of thousands of products and $1 billion of revenue last year. So that's a big number for a small country like Switzerland.
Hey, Lucas, for some reason your slides are not advancing. So I don't know if you have two monitors.
I've not advanced them yet.
Okay, got it. Okay, we have some people asking. Okay,
intro,
thanks.
blah, blah. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we'll start with two extremely boring slides to get a common understanding. Then right before you fall asleep, we'll go into Adobe Analytics to view some data that shows the impact of that blind spot. Then we'll go back to some slides and to show you how you can use the campaign cost importer and Adobe Analytics transaction ID data sources to tackle this blind spot. Finally, we'll look at some more analytics data that shows the power of transaction ID data sources. That is that all the data that you import can be correlated with everything just as if it had been collected on the website with that very transaction.
Hey, so Lucas, people, I'm sorry to interrupt, but people are not seeing any slides. Could you maybe stop sharing and share again? I see your slides, but some people are not. So maybe we kick Zoom into gear.
I'll stop sharing. I'll start sharing again. Can you see now this old picture of mine?
Yep, I see it. So I'll see if people in the chat can let me know. Okay, it looks like we're good now. Sorry about that.
No problem. Anyway, so some things about Lucas Oldenburg. I think that's me. Some people say that's me. I'm not sure sometimes. So I've been doing analytics since 2007, mostly now in the Adobe, Google, Tilium worlds. I have my own little company, Dim28. It's a one-man company. I never had any issues with my boss. That's the good thing about it. And there's also a useful tool for Adobe Analytics. I created the bulk component manager for Google Sheets. If you're lost in all the EVARs, props, and the thousands of segments and calculated metrics your users create or you create, then check out the link. I think I also have another session on that in July. So let's start. What is this blind spot of marketing measurement? This is the blind spot. That's what it looks like, but you can also read if you prefer text. It is the fact that you think that you're selling and you're telling everybody, that is analytics, Google ads, Facebook ads, etc., about that. But in fact, you're not selling or not that well. And that's a problem because the ones whom you tell that you're selling well will react to this, of course. Google will push the products you think you're selling in its ads, for example. But we'll get to more on that in a bit. First, let's get a common understanding of how tracking usually works and why just about every online shop I've seen has 3 major data silos. Let's look at a prototypical customer journey. We have this user here. This user clicks on an ad. That ad leads him or her to the online shop. The user clicks around, filters and searches, and finally buys something. This online shop runs a tag management system. In our case, that is Tealium, but doesn't really matter. It can be Adobe Launch, Google Tag Manager, Insight, and doesn't really matter. It also doesn't matter if it's server side or client side or whatever, or hybrid. So anyway, so the user, let's assume this user bought something for 500 Swiss francs. Now the shop sends this information to Tealium through the data layer, and then Tealium forwards that data to what I broadly and imprecisely refer to as ad networks via so-called tracking pixels or tags or conversion tags. I mean, those of you who work with tag management systems know what I'm talking about. And ad networks are our first silo. Ad networks for me are systems like Google Ads, Facebook Ads, email marketing tools like Emarsys or Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Criteo, etc. And ad networks are silos because, of course, they have some data that nobody else has. That is ad data, that is cost data, click data, impression data, or in the case of email marketing tools, it's email opens and email clicks. They also have some conversion and revenue data through these pixels. But in fact, they are not only just one silo, they're a silo of silos because Google Ads doesn't know about the Facebook data, Facebook doesn't know about the Emarsys data, and so on. So they're a silo of silos. And they usually have no or very limited on-site behavioral data. So all that clicking around that the user does before finally buying, they know nothing about that or very little, and they're also not good for analyzing that. And of course, they usually have no post-order data. And we will look at post-order data in a second. First, let's look at another pipe. So this data layer tag management system combo is of course not only good for feeding the ad networks with data, it of course also provides our web analytics tool with nearly the same data. Of course, the data our web analytics tools get is a lot richer and covers more on-site behavior like search, on-site search, usage of product detail page features, filtering, clicking on teasers on home pages, etc., etc. And of course, this data covers traffic from all channels, so from all ad networks. They don't have the siloed view. They also have web analytics tools also have organic search, referrals, direct traffic, etc. But the web analytics tools usually have no ad data, so they don't know about the cost of the traffic they're analyzing, and it has no post-order data. So what is post-order data? In every shop, there's something that I will now brutally simplify as backend logic. And this backend logic sends the very same order that we send to analytics and the ad networks to what is usually an enterprise resource planning or ERP system. For example, you might have Microsoft Navision or some SAP application or whatever. And inside these ERP systems, the order, which is immutable to analytics and the ad networks, becomes a sort of say mutable object, so to speak. So it can change. And those changes, those mutations are only reflected in the ERP system. And some major factors here are payment. The order may not get paid after all, and they're not shipped. Logistics or stock, the products that were ordered were out of stock, or there's some other logistical problem, cannot be delivered, gets returned, product breaks. Customer support, the user calls in and says, hey, I ordered 5 items, I just wanted 1. I was so greedy that I've clicked that damn add to cart button 5 times. Cancellations, refunds, etc. So this post-order data is super rich and super important. It decides what really ends up on our shop's bank account and whether the business has to close or not. But for whatever reason, post-order data is typically ignored completely in all of marketing measurement and conversion optimization. So let's look at some Adobe Analytics data that shows why this is not just a minor problem. Of course, it depends on the platform and you might not have this problem at all, but for 4 clients I work for, this is a major problem. And taking advantage of this data, making it more transparent, helps one of these clients save a lot of marketing budget and be much more precise in their optimizations. So first of all, I'm going to show some data from Adobe Analytics directly. Of course, I can't show you too much as this is the data of the client. So as you can see on the top right, I'm showing data from December 31st of 2021, which is of course, a joke. In the background, I'm using other date ranges, which are hidden. I'm also not showing absolute numbers. I'm using different date ranges for each of those visualizations. So you won't get a complete picture of this client. If you're a competitor, I'm sorry, but the examples should be good enough for you to get an idea of what I'm trying to bring across here. All right, let's start with a look at what I call tracked revenue versus bottom line revenue. And I'm going to use this word tracked revenue and bottom line revenue a lot. Tracked revenue is the revenue that we track on the website through the tag management system and send to analytics and to the ad network. So tracked revenue is the data that goes through this pipe here. Bottom line, or also actual revenue, is the revenue that ends up on our bank account when everything is said and done. So bottom line revenue is based on the important data that usually only our post-order data systems have. The credit for this whole thing goes to the client, by the way, and their head of data-driven marketing one day came to me and said, "Hey, Lucas, I looked at some of the revenue data in Adobe Analytics and compared it to the revenue data in the ERP system. And some categories had pretty good matches. There was between 90 and 100% matches of revenue, but others had gaps of 50 or 60%. And that's what we're seeing here. We see the tracked by bottom line revenue for a number of product categories. So each bar is a product category, and 100% means that for this category, all the revenue we track also ends up on our bank account. So for example, let's look here at snow boots. Snow boots have a 97.5% rate of tracked versus bottom line revenue. That means 97% of the revenue that we track into Google ads, Facebook ads, and to analytics in the first place is also ending up on our bank account. But there are some categories where that is not the case, and the gap is vast. So for example, here, home trainer, Fitnessgeräte. Here, for every 100 francs that we're sending to Google ads and Facebook and so on, less than 50, just 47 francs and 20, end up on our bank account. And that's a huge gap. You're telling Google you're earning 100 francs, but in fact, you're earning only 47. That's quite a difference. Of course, that's just the tracked revenue. We have not spoken about actual profit margins yet, and this is the second part of this blind spot. Most of the reporting system just look at revenue and not at profit margin, but any business has to earn profit, has to make a profit, and not just get revenue. But profit, for whatever reason, is completely disregarded in most cases. Of course, it's harder to track and harder to sort of integrate, but I think it should be integrated because it makes your data so much richer. So here we're seeing dots. Every dot represents a marketing campaign. And on the left axis, I'm going to talk about the axis in the bottom later. The left axis is the tracked revenue ROAS, so the return on ad spend that we also send to Google ads, to Facebook ads, etc. So revenue divided by cost. And what is the main underlying assumption in all of marketing measurement? It is that a good return on ad spend is good for business. But again, businesses need profit, not revenue to survive. So they don't need only a return on ad spend. They need most of all a positive profit margin. So in digital marketing, we are simply assuming that a good return on ad spend also means a positive impact on the bottom line. But that is not a given. Some campaigns, as we see here, have a very good return on ad spend for tracked revenue, but they're very poor in terms of profit divided by ad cost, which is what I call the margin ROAS. So the return on ad spend based on the margin. Let's look at this extreme example here where we have a tracked revenue ROAS, so the signal that Google ads gets, of 44. That means every franc that we spend on Google ads gives us 44 francs of revenue. That means, hey, Google, it's going absolutely marvelously well, superbly well. 44, that's ginormous. But if we look at the margin on ad cost, it's 0.9. That means for every franc we spend on ads, we get 90 cents back on our bank account. And you can do the math that we're actually losing money here, but we're telling Google that it's going amazingly well. So what will Google do? Google will further boost these ads or even raise the price for the clicks because it assumes we'll be just fine if the ROAS is a bit lower. So I think you get the idea that sending signals to ad networks based on return on ad spend or even paying agencies based on that can be really counterproductive. And this is also one of the main things that changed at this client after this data became available. The payment model of the agency stopped being based on return on ad spend because it gave the wrong signals. All right, so far so good. This is like the problem. What are the problems causes? What are the causes for these gaps? And this, of course, differs from business to business. But in our case, it's mainly two reasons. And sorry for this layout, but it's all you can do in a workspace. So first of all, it's people who are ordering but end up not paying due to fraud, insolvency, or change of mind. And the second main reason is, especially now with COVID, products being out of stock or cannot be delivered. Let's look at an example for payment type. Here again, we see three representative product categories: mobile phones, monitors, and home trainers. And we see the 6 most popular payment methods for each of these categories. And in the first example, mobile phones, we have a very low rate of just 64% for bill, which is invoice payment. This is the most popular payment method in Switzerland. The other payment methods have high rates. This is a typical case of fraud attempts. So people try to pay by invoice because then they hope they get the product shipped first and then can pay later, but then they never end up paying. I mean, in most of these cases, a financial check after the order changes these customers to prepayment, so they won't get the product, but still the revenue is being tracked, is sent to Google, is sent to analytics, and we assume we have 100 francs of revenue or 1,000, and we in fact have only 64% of that, and that's a big difference. This is a typical distribution for high status products like mobile phones. People try to get the newest, hottest phone and hope they won't have to pay it by selecting invoice as the payment method or trying around with different addresses and whatever. So mobile phones are a product that is prone to fraud. Anyway, monitors, this is a normal example here. Everything is going well. People are paying their bills. People who buy monitors pay their bills. So let's look at home trainers. And here we see all rates are low. Even Visa, where fraud is kind of difficult. Now, what does that mean? It indicates we have another problem here, not a problem of payment types or whatever. And most likely it is due to stocking issues. So, and yes, and home trainers are in such high demand due to COVID and fitness center being closed that this demand cannot be met at the moment. So this has been a recurring theme in e-commerce for the last 14 months, from puzzles to masks to sanitizers to whatever things all have been out of stock and these kinds of issues. So I mean, as this has been a recurring theme in e-commerce, this is something you absolutely must include your analytics data, which is stock. So stock level data. If you have an e-commerce shop and don't have analytics data with stock level info, then you're missing out on a lot of potential causes that you could analyze. So let's look at this here. We see here if a product is not in stock at the moment we purchase this, the green bar, the likelihood that it will be canceled later or not delivered or not paid is very high. So in this time range, less than 25 or 25% of the revenue of out of stock orders in home trainers actually ended up on the bank account, while it was 89% or 85.8% when the fitness trainer they ordered was in stock. So that's just to give you an overview over the problem and the causes, but and you've seen Adobe Analytics, the way it can look like when you integrate that ad data and the post order data into it. But I have not told you yet how you can do that. So let's go back to the slides and do that. And first of all, we open the silo on the left side, the ad data. And I'll do this a bit faster to not run out of time. There's a guy from Datacroft, which is the tool that we're using in the chat, Elliot Jones, who will also be happy to answer your questions if you have a specific question on ad cost import, or ad data import. So anyway, so this Datacroft campaign importer connects to all kinds of ad networks through their APIs, and they import the cost, clicks, impressions via these APIs. Then they calculate the delta to the data that they've already exported to Adobe Analytics, and then export that data multiple times a day into so-called summary data sources. And summary data sources are the simplest form of data sources. Those are just summary metrics per day and any combination of dimensions. So in our case, the dimension is the tracking code, the campaign ID, and the metrics are 3 success events, just cost, impressions, and clicks. And since we import based on the campaign tracking code, everything else that relies on the tracking code will also be able to use this imported data. So for example, the marketing channels or classifications that are derived from your tracking code will now also be able to report on cost. So with a smart marketing channel setup, you get cost on channel level. I can't show you the full numbers here, but yeah, so you see ad cost and return on ad spend on the product revenue for marketing channels. And the same for any campaign classification, for any marketing channel classification, for marketing channel detail, etc. You'll have cost, but not for anything else. And that's a downside of summary data sources. They're just linked to the dimensions for which you import. And that's a bit different with transaction ID data sources. And those are super powerful. And this is like the last slide I'm going to show. This is to open the post-order data silo. So let's look at this post-order data silo. And for this, I mean, you can do this in any other way, but the principle is always the same. You get usually an export from your ERP system of the current state per transaction ID and SKU product ID. And you get the same from Adobe Analytics. We do this via a data warehouse export. So it's just a large CSV file with all transaction IDs and product SKUs and the bottom line revenue and margin as the metrics. And then, and then Google Cloud runs some Python script that calculates the delta. And what do I mean by delta? Delta is the difference between this state and this state. So if we have already imported whatever 100 francs for transaction ID ABC, and now the ERP system says, hey, it's only 50 francs now because the order was canceled after all, or it's now 200 because we shipped that second product of the order, then we'll have to import the delta. So if we already imported 100 francs into Adobe Analytics, we'll have to import another 50 francs or whatever the delta is. So anyway, maybe that was not too clear because I think where was I? Sorry, I kind of got lost. Yeah, anyway, this delta thing is important because here we have a thing, you have a case of the changing past. So if a product is ordered on Monday but paid and shipped on Wednesday, then the ERP system won't have that revenue until Wednesday. On Tuesday, if I look into the ERP system on Tuesday, it will still say the revenue was 0. But then when I look on Wednesday after it was shipped, that revenue goes to whatever the revenue of that transaction was. So the past changes. So we cannot simply import yesterday's data. We always have to import the last 60 days, and then look at and then generate the delta and then import that delta. And now we import this delta into a so-called Adobe Transaction ID data source. And transaction IDs are free, and the FTP server that comes with it is also free. You just have to activate it in the admin console and Adobe admin area. And and then the data becomes available in your reports. Here we see an example of tracked versus actual revenue and the margin. And we see the margin here for the first 2 marketing channels. And we would also see the actual revenue and the tracked revenue and the ad cost and the visits, of course. I have whitened this out. And we see 2 transaction IDs for the second channel for paid search shopping. We see 2 transaction IDs, and we see for this first transaction ID, we have an tracked revenue. So the data we sent to ads, Google ads, and so on of 2,055, an actual revenue, a bottom line revenue of 1,906, a margin of 6.4. And if we look at the products that were part of this transaction ID, we see the first and the fourth product actually got paid and shipped, whereas the second and third product were never shipped. So that's why their actual bottom line revenue is 0. Okay, at this point, let's say a few words about the power of the transaction ID data source, because the transaction ID is a very special variable. It is special because you can import any metric or dimension with a transaction ID as the key, and the imported data will look as if it had been collected with the very same hit in which you track the transaction ID. And this is wonderful. For example, if you are a bank or an insurance, if you want to match offline leads to online, offline signups to online leads, or in our case, for a shop, we can match online revenue to actual bottom line revenue and margin, which can only be generated or imported at a later stage. This is what a transaction ID data source file looks like. So there's some header, then there's a column for the date for the product SKU, then any number of EVARs and and success events, so custom dimensions and custom metrics if you come from Google Analytics world. And the transaction ID is the last column, which is sort of the main key. All right, let's finish up with some more data from Adobe Analytics to show this power of this transaction ID, and then we'll have time for some questions. Here we see an example of margin per channel and campaign category. And then we break this down by product category level 3, and then by Warengruppe, which is a sort of product group. And what we can see here is the tracked versus actual revenue per channel. We see that there's a high gap for supermarket categories, for supermarket campaigns, between the tracked and the actual revenue. And if we break this down by level 3 categories, we see cooking ingredients is red. So there's probably some problem with cooking ingredients. And we can go one level further down. We see the spices, Gewürze, is probably the main reason why supermarket campaigns have a problem with the tracked revenue and the actually invoiced revenue. And here again, you see on the right side with the profit by ad cost. Here we have ad cost. The ad cost only shows for the campaign related dimensions. So this is a campaign ID classification, and this is the marketing channel, but we cannot see the cost on a product level. That's the downside of the summary data source. Two more examples, and then we'll finish. We've been looking a lot at campaign and product data, but it's perfectly possible with transaction ID data sources to see the margin for an on-site search term, for example, now, or for a product list. Take this example. The search term Schneeschuhe, snow boots, had a rate of tracked to actually invoiced revenue of 98.5% and a green margin. So the margin was also good. Of course, I can't tell you the real number here. The search term iPhone 12 Pro, though, had real issues. Only 26% of the revenue that was tracked after people clicked on results for this iPhone 12 Pro search were actually turned into bottom line revenue. So the margin is also red. And if we look at the clicks, the products that were clicked, we see that this first and this second iPhone had a rate of 0%. So they were clicked a lot and bought a lot after the search term, but they were never really paid or had to be canceled or whatever happened here. Hula hoop, another popular search term these days, but real stocking issues. 0.9% of the revenue that we track to Google Ads and so on actually gets onto a bank account at the moment, because this is a big problem on the worldwide market. Nobody has hula hoop rings. Very interesting. And final example, we track the customer ID as well and use classification imports to get more attributes on our customers into Adobe. Now we can also report on those customer attributes in terms of margin or tracked versus bottom line revenue. For example, here we see the customer type, private clients, medium enterprises, and so on. We see the normal stuff, visits, conversion rate, product revenue, but we also see tracked versus actually invoiced revenue. So this is from the transaction data source import. And we see profit margin. And we can then break this down by further customer attributes, for example, male and female. And we can now even break this down further by stuff that people did on the website. For example, here we have on-site campaigns. Those are teasers on the homepage, for example. So people who clicked on the Samsung Galaxy teaser on the homepage ended up paying only 56% of the revenue that they generated on the website. And it was a bit higher for men than for female. And the profit margin of this on-site campaign was also worse than the profit margin for the other on-site campaigns. All right, so I hope this gave you a little bit of a glimpse into what you can do with transaction ID data sources and how you can close this loop from ad cost to bottom line revenue, and how Adobe Analytics can help you doing that. And thanks for watching. And now I'm open to answering questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lucas. That was a wealth of information in 30 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are on the call, if you have questions, I know there's already a couple that have come in. Please post them to the Zoom Q&A area. I also wanted to highlight that Lucas mentioned a lot about data sources and transaction ID in the chat. I went ahead and posted a link to a past SDEC session that I did on data sources and transaction ID. If you just need a little bit of a refresher for that, you'll find that it's the last thing that is in the chat right now. So let's jump into some of the questions. So a couple folks may have joined a little bit late and had some questions, but they wanted to see if you could maybe outline what were the different data sources that you used here, like just quickly rattling off, where are you combining all this data from?
Yeah, so profit margins and actual revenue, bottom line revenue, are transaction ID data sources. Ad cost and clicks are summary data sources, ad cost here. And then we have lots of classification imports, like customer type is a classification import. All this product data you're seeing here, product name, product type, those are all simple product SKU-based classifications.
Okay. And yes, someone did have a question about that, like how much you are using same classifications. But just to reiterate, anything here that's using same classifications is fine. It's treated the same way as if it was created organically through JavaScript, correct?
Not really. I would say so. Well, because I mean, same classifications only allow imports. I mean, you see, we have lots of same classification. Everything that starts with cprod is a product-based same classification. But same classifications only allow you to import dimensions, so they don't allow you to import metrics. And same classifications are also time agnostic. They're retroactive, but they can only have one value. Whereas transaction ID data sources are valid for that very date, for that very second where this transaction ID happened, but not sort of for all time. If the product name changes, then the classification name, the name in the classification is uploaded, and then that new name gets displayed for all data, no matter if I'm looking at the data for the time before that name was changed. And that's sort of sometimes a downside, sometimes it's a good part of normal classifications.
Yeah, and I think I have a blog post on that. While you're answering the next couple questions, I'll see if I could find it and put it in the chat. The next question we have here is there a cost for the API service to bring in ad data from third parties?
That the cost is for the campaign cost importer. So if you're using Datacroft like we're doing it, then you of course have to pay for that tool. But the APIs of these ad networks themselves are usually not, they're usually free, and Adobe's data sources are also free by now. I think you used to have to pay per row of import, but I think this is also no longer true.
Okay.
Maybe.
Next question is, if a product was returned, how do you map it back to the original transaction ID?
Yeah, this is, here we have all the rows that we import have a transaction ID and a SKU. So that return will be associated to the same transaction ID and SKU, and that way it's also mapped into the same order. So the transaction ID and the product ID are sort of the common key for any data imports.
Yeah, and there's, and for those of you who are curious, if you just Google like my name and returns transaction ID, there's the blog post I wrote, I think 8 years ago about how you
like
can
90% of
that.
this I learned from Adam Greco, so thanks again for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's transaction ID has been around for a long time. And for those of you who are interested in the topic that Lucas talked about today, another session I would highly recommend you check out in the past is when Trevor Paulson talked about AEP and customer journey analytics, because a lot of the stuff that Lucas talked about here, Adobe is trying to make a little bit easier by letting you import any data you want into the Adobe Experience platform, which in many respects will actually kind of replace some of the stuff that we've done in transaction ID in the past. But again, there's a price tag associated with that, and everything Lucas showed here today is very easy to do without spending a lot of money.
Exactly. I mean, if you have the AEP, then you won't use transaction ID editors, hopefully, because those
Yeah,
really look like from 1999 and but they're really powerful.
yeah. AEP is like transaction ID on
On
steroids.
steroids, exactly.
Next one. How do you post this data and insights to various ad networks if the ROAS optimization is the use case that we're solving for?
That's a good one because this is really hard to do. I mean, Google Ads, to be fair, has a margin feature now for a while. And this was also one of the reasons why we implemented this, because we wanted to compare the margin data in Google Ads with ours. So you can import margins per product into Google Ads. Of course, that's not really the same as having bottom line revenue and bottom line margin, because cancellations and stock issues will still not be reflected in that Google Ads data. And in this case, the client, depending on who logs in, they see a different price. So you cannot say this product has this margin. It really depends on the user who's buying it, because everybody gets a different price. But yeah, so but anyway, with margin imports to Google Ads, you can sort of close the loop a little bit on the Google Ads side. On the other side, it's sort of manual right now. So we just see, oh, this campaign drives a lot of fraudulent purchases, because whatever iPhone 12 people want to have this iPhone 12 for free, want to pay for it. Then we just have to manually react to that. So that of course means the reaction is kind of delayed, but it's better than no reaction. Earlier, we were running bad campaigns for 2 months, and then we discovered, oh God, nobody paid for that stuff that they paid online.
Okay, next question is it necessary to use classifications if we get the entire data with data layer? Which is the additional value?
Yeah, I usually recommend to put stuff into the data layer that is temporary, because classifications are retroactive, but they have the same value for all eternity. But if you have temporary values like whatever, the price, or price is a bad example, but a certain ad label or a list name or whatever, then that goes into the data layer. But everything else, I think, should be imported with classification imports. But of course, you can put it all into the data layer. If you have it all there, perfect. I just tend to not put too much into the data layer, to not bloat it up too much.
Okay, and then someone had asked a question about how did you kind of do color condition measures, and Philippe had answered that's just a general out-of-the-box functionality of Adobe Analytics that you could format your freeform tables and do conditional formatting.
Exactly.
So if there's any other questions that anyone has, feel free to post them in the Q&A. Otherwise, we might wrap a little early. While we're waiting for any questions, I did put a couple old blog posts related to transaction ID in the chat, and also a post that I wrote about when you should think about using sync classifications versus using an actual variable, and where you can get into yourself a little bit of trouble if you don't really know what you're doing versus using, say, an EVAR or an SPROP and using a sync classification. But I think I think we've tapped everyone out. I think everyone's brains are full. So Lucas, thank you so much for presenting. And I know you have another one coming up soon, which we're excited about as well. This will be posted in the Slack group later. Thanks everyone for attending. And once again, Lucas, thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom and knowledge.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the week.
Okay, take care, everyone. Thanks so much.